Hello, today I want to talk about reading. I guess specifically the kind of thrust of this video is about reading more, not necessarily about reading more just for its own sake, that there's some kind of intrinsic value on soaking up 1,000 pages of text over the course of a week. More that there's value in becoming a more well-read person, someone who reads a greater variety of different texts, who engages in a world of thought and ideas that dates back, thousands of years, that all of these things have value for us. I'll talk a little bit about the Kindle and why I have completely changed my mind about the Kindle over the last few years. And then to finish up, I will give a few practical tips on how you might find some time and space for more reading in your life, if that's something that you think you want to do. So why should we read? Why should we read more? Number one for me is about self-improvement. So it was a really big concern of the ancients that we knew ourselves as well as knew about the external world around us, that we had some kind of introspection and reflection. That's not a task that we can really necessarily, I think, do in isolation. We can't sit down and examine ourselves like we might examine something under a microscope. Instead, we need to do it through reflection. So we need to read and see the world around us reflected back at us, understand different viewpoints and different ways of looking at things, see through someone else's eyes, learn about different cultural ways of doing things, and then we might have a chance of understanding our own motivations, seeing where our own foundational beliefs lie, perhaps changing those beliefs as things go on. And that comes to the second part of this, which is about self-improvement. So knowing oneself is fine, but as well as knowing oneself as we are, as a static being, we should also seek to improve ourselves as we go on. And for me, that's a big impact that reading has. Reading can help us to become a more well-rounded person, someone who understands our culture, a global culture, a national culture, a local culture, someone who understands different viewpoints, someone who has a greater understanding of the natural world, of science, of history, of how all these things interconnect, of religion, of my own faith. That's something that reading, I believe, has helped me to do. It was a big concern of mine when I was a teenager that I didn't really feel like school had prepared me for being this kind of well-rounded, well-adjusted person. Unfortunately, I feel like reading more widely as an adult has, to some extent, helped me with that. Thirdly, I think knowledge of others, so other places and people and ideas, different cultures, different ways of doing things. This is a really, really beneficial part of reading. So I love to read travel books, and I've been reading a book by William Dalrymple about his time living in India. And not only am I getting these kind of amusing anecdotes and this good storytelling, I'm also learning about partition in 1947 and the movement of people from Punjab and Kashmir, the creation of Pakistan, the impact that had on Delhi, the violence that was there and the way that people dealt with it. And I didn't really know about any of these things beforehand, but now I could have a more interesting and engaged conversation if I was to meet someone from Punjab than I would be able to before. And you multiply that by all the books that you might read over your lifetime, and by the time you get into sort of later adulthood, you can start to become someone with a solid, good, decent, generalized knowledge of the world. And that's actually really important and really rewarding, and a really good argument for reading more. And finally, and it's actually so important, I've underlined it here in my notes, and that is enjoyment. I think there's maybe like 1% of people in the world for whom they really don't get anything out of reading, and that's fair enough. This video is not really for you. This video is about love of reading. It's so enjoyable to read a novel and get engaged with all the characters. And that final third of a novel, particularly a fantasy novel, where you know the characters, you know the kind of world that exists, and you get to see that plot play out and come to some kind of conclusion, often leaving you hanging because it's like book one of a trilogy or something like that. But even so, like, it's so rewarding and so enjoyable, and enjoyable in a very different way to the kind of enjoyment that we get every day through like short format videos or through reading tweets. Those are kind of short-term entertainment, like eating a sweet, eating a bit of candy. Whereas reading a book is much more long-term, much more rewarding, much more enjoyable over a course of hours rather than seconds. And if you've never read something like a genre novel, so if you've never read a sci-fi novel or a fantasy novel, that's something that I would really recommend for that enjoyment factor. They are so engaging, particularly if you find one that gels with a style of writing that you really enjoy. Take a look. And I don't think this video or this sort of essay section of this video is not an argument for necessarily reading a set list of books. One of the things that's really difficult about books is choice, and I think I might do a video at some point about how to choose a book to read or choose the next book to read. And we can look at libraries and bookshops. We can look at recommendations online or the bibliography of a book. If you only read, say, like 2 or 3 books a year, that choice is really important. It's difficult to talk about choice and not talk about mortality, because ultimately we only have a short period of time on Earth. And if you're only reading 2 or 3 books a year, you might only read like 30 or 40 books over the next decade. And so therefore you're going to want to really think really carefully and agonize about what book you're going to read next. If you say, for example, I might read 40 books this year, which I'm not trying to make out that that's, a massive amount, but it's a lot bigger than 2 or 3. And I'm going to be slightly less concerned about picking the most influential, important books possible, and I'm going to give myself a bit of space and time to read some books that I'll just enjoy, and also to pick up books and drop books that I'm not enjoying. It's a lot more liberatory to read lots of books and to not feel like you're compelled by that choice. And that choice comes to a matter of taste as well. Arnold Bennett has this incredible quote about literary taste and choosing books to read. He says, "Stand defiantly on your own feet and do not excuse yourself to yourself. You do not exist in order to honour literature by becoming an encyclopedia of literature. Literature exists for your service. Wherever you happen to be, that for you is the centre of literature." And I like the idea of it being the centre of literature, because then you can choose lots of paths moving out from where you are. If you restrict yourself to reading just the Western canon or a certain reading list of books, you're not going to get that enjoyment of freedom of choice. You're not going to get that enjoyment of sometimes slightly random exploration of the world of literature. And so a brief digression on the Kindle and why it's been so revolutionary. In 2011, I worked in a bookshop in Norwich, and I had a badge on my rucksack that said no e-readers, only real books, or I read real books. And that's not true anymore. I've completely changed my mind on e-readers. I think at the time we were quite scared that these new devices were going to replace reading physical books, and that the bookshops were going to be on the demise, which, back in 2011, we already felt that bookshops were kind of on the way out anyway. And that's not been the case at all. Bookshops are doing really well now. Independent bookshops in the UK, there's been lots of new ones opening. They seem to be really thriving, and I think that's because, for me and for a lot of readers, this doesn't replace physical books, but it supplements them. I still love going to bookshops and choosing new books to read. I'll quite often be reading a few physical books and a few ebooks at any one time, and if I'm reading a fantasy novel, for example, and I want to have the whole set of them on my shelves, then I'll buy the novel and in a physical and an e-reader copy. The reason I really want an e-reader copy of it is because it's so amazing to read on an e-reader. It really is a device that has been perfectly designed to do one thing and one thing well, and that's allow you to read. So the benefit of this is that I can read with this anywhere, anytime. I can be sitting on a bus at night, I can be in bed, I could be out in the garden in the evening, and I'm not restricted by having perfect lighting conditions because it's got a lovely warm backlight to it. The screen is easy to read in sunlight, often as easy to read as a page would be, because it's matte and it's not reflective of the sun. So there's really a lot of benefits to that. And the other thing is, having hundreds of books in your pocket at any one time is basically the future that we were promised in the 1950s. This feels like a kind of device, like a Bakelite video phone, that is what people before the internet imagined a future would be. And I find that really pleasing. I find it really good to be like living in a 1950s version of the future. I like the fact, because as I say, I might be reading 6 books at one time. I'm a bit like that. So I like being able to pick between 100 or 200 books that I have saved on here at any given time, to be able to refer to anything in my library at any moment. If I want to share a quote with a friend or show someone a picture in a book, I don't have to be at home to do it. I can be doing it on this device. I suppose I should say I'm using the word Kindle interchangeably. Any e-reader is more or less pretty similar. I use a Kindle because I do use the Amazon store to put books on here, but you don't have to. You can use EPUBs and PDFs and use the send to Kindle feature. I think people think it's kind of locked into Amazon's ecosystem because it feels like that would be the case, but it's actually not. You can borrow books from your local library that will have DRM in them that expire after a certain period, or you can use websites like Standard Books that format copyright-free books into nice e-published books and put them on here to read. And finally, this is a fairly distraction-free advice, which has always surprised me. I always thought Amazon would try and do something to turn this into a way that they can monetize your attention like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram does. But actually, on the whole, it doesn't. It's literally just, when you turn it on, it is literally just a page that you have in front of you. There are no notifications, no buzzing, no apps. It's not trying to get your attention other than to just allow you to read the book. Yes, you can flick back to the Amazon store and waste your time trying to find a new book to read, but in a way that's never really going to be something that disappears with book reading. You're always going to spend some of your time thinking about what you could be reading next. It also allows you to highlight things like you would in a physical book. Instead of writing in the margin, you can use the e-ink keyboard to make notes. And better than a physical book, it actually places all those quotes available online in the Kindle Cloud Reader for you. And I find that really beneficial. You can copy and paste them, share them. Obviously, the most important ones you can write in a commonplace book, but you could see yourself doing that for every quote in a physical book. It can be quite time consuming, not a good idea. Whereas Amazon is going to allow you to keep all those quotes always accessible. So if you want to get back into reading and you think that this is something you would enjoy, go out, pick up a secondhand Kindle. You can probably get, I've seen ones about for £50 or £40, very basic models, and have a go, see how you get on with one, because it might surprise you how much you enjoy it if you're not someone who particularly enjoys technology. So finally, with these video essays, I always want to end on a few practical tips that people might want to use to help them implement some of the things that we've been talking about. So for example, how we might read more. I think it's not easy is the first thing to say. Don't expect that you are going to be able to change your concentration to break habits of months and years construction, and just sit down and be able to read Proust's novel in a day. I sometimes hear people reading books in a day and I think, okay, that's good for them, but it's not really something that I can do. Realistically, you have to be realistic about what you can actually do with reading. And so don't obsess over finding the right spot to read in. It's always going to be a bit of a compromise. You can spend hours trying to create a little reading nook for yourself. You can go and find the absolute perfect coffee shop, but as soon as someone next to you starts having a loud conversation, that kind of illusion is broken. So don't hype it up. Just make it a sort of everyday activity, something that you just do, that you don't need to be in a special place, do at a special set time, something you just pick up a book and you're just reading. When you're doing that, you do need to put your phone away, needs to be out of sight. Your phone is a hub of pure entertainment, dopamine-inducing short-form content. It is designed to capture and keep your attention, to trap you on it for hours at a time. We've all been there. We've all done it. We've all seen our time disappear when we're staring at YouTube or TikTok or whatever it is. So when you are reading, even for a short period of time, take your phone out of your pocket. It goes on charge on the other side of the room. I actually turn the screen so it faces the other way. And that's the only way you're going to be able to concentrate on reading 20, 30, 40, 50 pages at a time without a break. And that's really the only way that you're going to make your way through novels and things and keep hold of the story, is if you're not checking your phone every 5 pages. I found it really useful to experiment with different audio whilst I'm reading. So there's this idea that we need to have pin drop silence when we read. I don't think that's particularly helpful. I read a lot on public transport, and I cannot bear people's conversations going on whilst I'm reading. So I invested in some good noise cancelling headphones. I will listen to lo-fi, hip hop a lot. There's a lot of streams of that on YouTube. Or I'll listen to some really good videos I found on YouTube of forest sounds, beach sounds, different kind of ambient noise. And it's just enough to block out the world around you and block out the conversation, but not provide any distraction in and of itself. I find even listening to classical music or jazz can be a bit distracting for when you're reading. So it's about trial and error, experiment, try and find something that works so that you can concentrate, but also kind of block out the world around you. And finally, and most importantly, is making reading your default distraction activity. So instead of, I guess in the past, my default distraction activity was Instagram stories and Twitter. And I would spend really long periods of time sat looking at those, literally hours of my day on those apps. If you switch that over time to reading, then you're getting hours of a day in which you can read and which you make progress with reading. You also train your brain to do something worthwhile and valuable with your downtime. So instead of when you've ordered your coffee and you're waiting for it to be made, it's much better to open up the Kindle app and make some progress in like 2 pages of reading or a couple of paragraphs of reading than it is to get that kind of little dopamine hit from checking your Instagram notifications, because one of those is working towards a goal, one of those is working towards something that you want to achieve and to make you a better, more well-rounded person, and one of them is a compulsion that's been created by a mega corporation in order to capture your attention so that they can sell more adverts to the people who make bamboo toothbrushes. I know which one is a system that I would rather partake in, and I've been trying to train myself so that if I'm waiting for something, if I have downtime, it's the Kindle that I'm picking up and it's not my mobile phone. I'm just going to leave you with this wonderful quote. Henry David Thoreau, one of my favourite authors, Walden, a book that you can actually download from Standard Books. It's out of copyright. You can put it on your Kindle straight away. And he said the following thing about the written word. The written word is the choicest of relics. It is something at once more intimate with us and more universal than any other work of art. It is the work of art nearest to life itself. It may be translated into every language and not only be read, but actually breathed from all human lips. And I love that idea. I love reading as a universal. If you get into YouTube book channels or Discords, sharing that kind of experience of reading is really valuable. I'm on Goodreads. I'll put a link to my Goodreads profile below if you want to go and have a look at what I'm reading at the moment and add me as a friend on there. I'd really appreciate that. If you've enjoyed the video, leave a comment about what it is that you're doing to try and read more and any tips that you have. Like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And it's always a pleasure to speak to you, and I'll speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.